Urban View, where talk empowers and becomes action. That was a video clip. Hi, YouTube. For those of you on Urban View, I'm also doing this segment on YouTube. That was a video clip that was essentially seeking to explain what was happening in the minds of this young 17-year-old Black boy who, as a result, or as we now know, from his writings, was dealing with a lot of internalized self-hatred. You all may be aware of this story who are hearing about it for the first time, but this is a young boy in Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, who had so much internal angst around being a Black child that he was motivated to take a weapon to the school where he unalived another young student as well as himself. His name, I'm not going to say because I don't typically say the names of young school shooters, but I acknowledge the fact that this is a slightly different case because, one, we're not used to seeing school shooters show up in this way as young Black children. Often when we think about school shootings, it's a different demographic entirely. But the other issue is that there was so much of what this young boy said in his writings that indicate a real struggle with Blackness, with being a Black child, that it's very important for us to unpack it because of the time that we're in. I want to start with a few quotes. The first is from Malcolm X, surprising no one, who says that only a fool will let his enemy educate his children. Only a fool would let his enemy educate his children. And Malcolm X also asks in one of his speeches, which we popularized as "Who taught you?" He goes to this litany of questions where he says, the texture of the hair that God gave them so much that they put lye on it. Do you realize now, brother, that lye will eat a hole in steel and you know that your head is not that hard? Malcolm X says, who taught you? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to so much that you do not want to be around each other? And what's interesting about that is there's a phrase that I have used repeatedly in my forays into education, and that is simply this, that the Jews would never allow the Nazis to educate their children. And I want us to be clear about what that means. The Jews would never allow Nazis to educate their children. Now, often when I have said that in years gone past, it's been sort of perceived as being hyperbolic. Oh, there's Lurie using inflammatory language again. I'm very intentional with the words that I use. And so when I say Jews would not allow Nazis to educate their children, it resonates a bit more because we're now surrounded by Nazis. Right? We're now surrounded by people who are doing literal Nazi salutes from stages, but we're also surrounded by not just white nationalists, we're also surrounded by people who are at least enough in alignment with the ideology of white nationalism that they're not going to fight it. They're not going to put up any resistance to it, and they're going to be perfectly content to allow these things to continue to happen. And so we have to unpack this a little bit because we had a caller, shout out to Cynthia, who called just before we went to commercial break, who was talking about the fact that we don't have strategies and tactics. And one of the strategies and tactics that I think we should be using, and we're going to have a much more in-depth conversation literally tomorrow about strategies and tactics before we get to our conversation on Thursday about FUBU February and the need for us to buy all Black everything. But we're in a moment right now where we got to unpack some of these things because particularly when it comes to educating not just our children, but ourselves, we have missed the boat in some key ways that I think is important for us to address. So yesterday we learned that as a result of Donald Trump's issuing of these executive orders, that the Air Force was no longer going to be teaching about the Tuskegee Airmen, which was weird because like the Tuskegee Airmen, they actually happened. Like the war wouldn't have gotten won were it not for the help of the Tuskegee Airmen. That is like a factual thing that happened in real life. And so to suggest that because you're uncomfortable with the idea that Black people can accomplish things, that we then shouldn't learn about one of the fundamental reasons why this country won one of the most significant wars it was a part of is, one, foolish, but it's also a real tell because that has nothing to do with DEI. Except if you embrace the fact that DEI was necessary because DEI had to serve as a hack to disrupt white America's collective agreement to prohibit anyone who wasn't Black from being able to participate in any of the things. Now, when that's the understanding of DEI, well then, yeah, okay, sure. We can say that the Tuskegee Airmen were a part of DEI because DEI was necessary because y'all were losing the war. You were losing the war. And Black pilots who had worse training than you were better than white pilots. So just like with the Negro leagues in baseball, black athletes who were not able to get the training that white athletes had, when y'all played each other, when white athletes were playing the black athletes from the Negro leagues, they won 2 out of 3 games. So again, every time we see where a diverse, equity, and inclusion approach has had to be taken and black people come in and dominate, we understand that you have to use racism, because when you recognize that you can't compete and you set up a system based on competition, that's really the only thing that you got. But that more about, less about that and more about this. They also said that they weren't going to be teaching about women in the Air Force. Women in the Air Force exist. Like they're present. They have breasts, vaginas, reproductive organs that don't include penises, and they exist, and they're doing just fine in the Air Force. It was interesting because Nancy Mace out of South Carolina, posted a picture that talked about how she had to fight to be a part of the Citadel, and because they weren't accepting women. Nancy Mace is a DEI in that case hire. Like, she doesn't like DEI, but that's because a lot of people who are white don't think that they benefit from these things. If you are a rural person, you're going to school in rural America and you're getting recruited to go to colleges and you're part of the rural American approach to diversification, you're DEI. So when Donald Trump wrote a letter yesterday, and OMB, the Office of Management and Budget out of the federal government, basically says, we're not spending any more money. We can't spend any more money after 5 p.m. today. And as far as we understand, that includes SNAP, that includes Pell Grants, that includes all the funding that students rely on. And we got students coming back to colleges like right now from the winter break. So all of those things are now paused as of 5 p.m. today. And they're talking about DEI this, DEI that, and they're using these approaches to essentially just dismantle what has been able to be borne out as a result of America being an integrated state. But I want to talk specifically about what's happening in our schools, because everything that and now, of course, the Air Force has said, we're not actually going to take it out. We're putting back the lesson. Our bad. We overreached. Well, no, you reached within the realm of what you thought was the actuality of where this country is going. And I'm glad that you did that, because it now gives us an opportunity to discuss it in connection to what happened in Tennessee. So this young boy, this brother, young boy, 17 years old, black boy, he declares himself an honorary member of the Klan. It's like as if Clayton Bigsby from Dave Chappelle's show was like a young child in real life and not blind. And one of the things that he says in his writings, that he was so ashamed to be black. That's one of the first things that he wrote. He was so ashamed to be black. He's got anti-Semitic writings in there as well. He's got support for the Goyim Defense League, which we heard in the clip. That's a neo-Nazi white supremacist group that was present in Nashville, marching through Nashville just this past summer. He says he was inspired by Candace Owens, who previously called Nashville home. He says the following: I was so miserable, I wanted to kill myself. I just couldn't take anymore. I am a worthless subhuman, a living, breathing disgrace. All my real life friends outgrew me like they didn't effing know me. Being me was so effing humiliating. That's why I spent all day disassociating. He writes about the fact that he's very upset about the racial diversity of this school. This is a black child who hates blackness walking in a black body. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? Who taught you to hate yourself? Jews don't let Nazis educate their children. Now, we are in a moment right now where we have to go back and we gotta think about decisions that we've made in the past, right? We collectively as a people. And I'm not one of those people who say, I wouldn't have done this if I was one of my ancestors, because I don't know what I would have done back then. And quite frankly, a whole lot of people saying what they would have and would not have done back in the day ain't doing shit right now. So we know they wasn't gonna be doing shit back then either. But when it comes to education, when it comes to who's got access to the brightest and best parts of our day, our learning hours, when it comes to that, when we go back and we think about what was happening to get our kids into these schools, we have to be aware of what we did so that we don't make those same mistakes going forward, and so that we learn from the decisions that were made in the past. I want you to think about it. Like, there was a decision to allow Black babies. Ruby Bridges was 6 years old. The Little Rock Nine young people, to allow them to go into buildings. Outside of the buildings, you've got people who are gathered as parts of mobs, who are throwing tomatoes, throwing bags of feces, calling them all sorts of names outside of the school. So before they get into the school, physical school building, they have to navigate this crowd. Before they get to the crowd, many of them, not all, not nearly enough, some of them were getting armed guard and protection from the time they left their front door, because of the hatred that white Americans collectively had against these Black children getting access to white schools. Now, keep in mind, the first people who were fighting, they weren't fighting for access to white schools. They wanted equal money. They wanted resources. And white folks was like, well, we're not going to give you them resources, but we will let you in our schools. And think about what it meant for Black children to leave the safety of a Black institution, an educational institution. In fact, where's my book? Here it is. Learning in a Burning House. I want y'all to get this book, Learning in a Burning House. It describes this concept intimately. But I want you to think about those kids leaving their Black schools where they were taught by teachers who were a part of their community, going through these crowds where people are disparaging them, calling them all sorts of disgusting things, to sit in a classroom with teachers in the classroom who were related vis-a-vis family, marriage, and friendship to the crowds of people outside, white teachers who had never been taught anything about the specific needs of these children, and who had, up until the time these kids were in their class, probably never even interacted with a Black child and had no reason to see them as anything but N-words. Who taught you to hate yourself? Now, I'm going to just say, we have had an education achievement gap ever since. Okay, ever since. We ain't had no education achievement gap prior to integrated education. But this is not about, before we integrated, we this, that, and the other. The reality is we're here now. We're here. And so what do we do now, understanding that when you allow Nazis to educate our children, and whether your child is being taught by actual Nazis or your child is just being taught by culturally incompetent teachers who can come in a variety of races, let us be clear. Let us be clear. The fact of the matter is, today's educators are not in any way prepared to meet the needs of these children. And we have to be very clear that every school community is being culturally responsive. The question is, to whose culture are they responding? Because when white children who descended from slave owners are going into schools, they are getting their educational needs met. When Black children who descended from those who were owned by enslavers are going into schools, they are not getting their needs met. We were just at the beginning of the DEI effort, an effort that Black educators and parents have been fighting for years, because we understood that there were best practices that would allow us to meet the needs of our children, which are not the same as the needs of white children, primarily because of the decisions that white children's parents make and made. But now, what do we do with this information when we see real life examples of what exposure to curriculum that does not meet that was never designed for our children, when it is going to produce these sorts of results? We have to ask ourselves different questions. So I want you all right now, just as an exercise, I want you to think about 5 children that you know in your community. Just 5 kids. It don't got to be yours. It ain't got to be yours. 5 kids that you know in your community. And I want you to think about what they like, what they're interested in, and what, if you were to present to them, they would be like, yeah, I would do that. So if you know you got a lot of kids in your community who like race cars or who like whatever, and you were to be like, hey, we can go down to the racetrack. Y'all want to come? See how excited they get. And then think about tying that thing to some educational structure. Because right now, at this point, we ain't got time for y'all to create independent schools. I know everybody want to create an independent school, especially when there's oppression. Everybody wants to create an independent school. You ain't got time to create an independent school, because if you did, you would have did it, and you ain't did it. But what you could do is, on Saturday mornings, before you go hang out with the kids and take them to the racetrack, or take them to get some ice cream, or take them to whatever, you can bring them all to sit on the stoop, sit on the porch, and you could have a conversation. You could read you could show them a clip, read with them an article, talk to them about, talk to the educators in your community, find out about what they were doing back in the day to make sure that their children had access to education. We have to create the independent institutions, talking about strategies and tactics, that are going to supplement the education that our children have, knowing full well that most of we don't have the capacity to create independent schools. But you could create an African-centered Saturday school. And you could use authors like Jawanza Kunjufu and his Set Clay curriculum, Self-Esteem Through Culture Leads to Academic Excellence, SETCLAE, Set Clay. And you can Google these things. You can order them offline. You can order that off of Amazon, for those of you who ain't protesting Amazon. But I want you to get access to Black History 365. They got curriculum for every grade level. If you use Jawanza Kunjufu's book, he's got workbooks for K through 12. You can order them. You can make copies. Hell, you can put digital copies. You can tie the lesson to some YouTube videos. This is not that hard, is what I'm saying. This is not that hard. And it's now fundamentally necessary. We're seeing in the state of Florida how, after they took away AP Black history, they have now created an opportunity where on the weekends, Black kids are gathering to learn Black history. They're about to cancel Black History Month. Just expect it. Don't be surprised. Don't be all wailing and gnashing your teeth. Black History Month wasn't for them. Black History Month was for us. And they don't get the right to cancel shit that wasn't theirs, but they're going to cancel their honoring and celebration of it. Damn them and damn that. Because this month, there needs to be African-centered Saturday schools popping up in every single community. In this Black History Month, there's going to need to be the birthing of institutions. If you got time after school, then I'm gonna need you to have an after-school program Monday, Wednesday, and Friday where the kids can come do their homework with you, and then you got somebody who can come and talk to them about whatever the skills are. We have to create the institutions that are going to produce the results that we want. I'll leave you with one example before we get ready to go to commercial break and take your calls at 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK. Years ago when I was in law school, and my audience knows the story. I'm in law school. I'm at NYU. I'm in the laundry room. And me and one of my friends who was a white boy, we doing laundry. And we talking about diversity because that's what I did, because that's what I always do. We talking about all this stuff. And he's like, dude, Lurie, I mean, like totally, I'm like 1000% for diversity, like totally. But like I learned in Hebrew school, like I can't help you if I haven't like helped my own community get their needs met. And I was like, wait, like you learned where? Where did you learn that? He's like, Hebrew school. You know, like I'm totally for diversity, dude. Don't get me wrong. But like, I can't help you if I haven't been able to help me. I got to help me first. And I said, yeah, I heard that. But where did you learn that? And he tells me about Hebrew school. And Hebrew school is an institution that women like Rebecca Gratz came together in the early 1800s because they realized that it was a whole bunch of Jewish kids coming from a bunch of different countries that they didn't know the culture, they didn't know the language, they didn't know Hebrew, couldn't read it, couldn't write it, couldn't sing it. So they created Hebrew schools that were modeled off of Sunday schools. And now anywhere you go in the whole freaking world, if you have a child who is a part of the Jewish community, you can type in your zip code. I don't know if you can actually do this, but you can find a local Hebrew school in your community. And in this Hebrew school, from the time you're like 3 to 5 years old until you're 13, 14 and beyond, you're going to learn Jewish history, culture, language, challenges, values, expectations, so that by the time you hit 13 or 14, you get to have your bar mitzvah, your bat mitzvah, you become welcomed into the community as an adult, you have your rites of passage, but none of that can happen if you are not going to Hebrew school. Same is true with Koreans, same is true with Chinese, every other community has recognized the need to not, one, allow the Nazis to educate their children, and two, to control the education of their children on their own. This is not hard. Creating a school that's going to be approved by their curriculum, then approved by their review board. Now that is hard. That is a challenge. Not to say we can't do it, but I'm just saying everybody could do this. Everybody could get a parents group together and y'all read the parents article, a chapter at a time. Everybody could have a Saturday school on a stoop. Everybody could do that. You know how I know everybody could do it? Because everybody used to do it. Because that's what we used to do. And as they're telling you, they're not going to teach you nothing about yourself. They weren't capable of doing it anyway. As they're telling you, they don't want you to learn anything about yourself. They were too afraid to learn it and teach it properly anyway. Don't be so caught up in what they're doing when you got opportunities to create plans. Y'all gonna abandon Black History Month? Bet. We didn't really need your hands in it in the first place. Here's what we are going to do to make sure that we make this the most amazing, dynamic Black History Month since Carter G. Woodson breathed his last breath. It's time not to wallow and cry and gnash our teeth, but it is time to do for self. It is time for Kuji Chagalia. It is time. And these folks don't care. And they're not going to do it. And as I told you all ad nauseum for the past many, many years, think about every single resource that we rely upon as a people that is not provided for us by us. And then think about how we provide that resource for ourselves when those people say they're not going to provide it anymore. They done cancel payments after 5 p.m. today on a whole host of things. They done cancel activities and job opportunities and research and that is going to benefit all of us, not just Black people, everybody. They don't care. And they are destroying this nation one block at a time. The question we have to ask ourselves is, what institutions are we going to build for ourselves so that we do the work of making sure that we not only survive, but maybe we finna thrive. Go ahead on and let them do what they got to do. It's our time. But only when we recognize that we solve our problems best, and can't nobody solve a problem like we when we are working on our own. We got to go to commercial break. 866-801-8255. 866-801-TALK is the number. We will take your calls. YouTube, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe and do all the things and share. We got work to do, and we can do it. But we got to want it. We have to be willing to do it. And as we heard in the moment of gratitude this morning, we got to finish what we start. Heading to commercial break. Much more to come. We'll be right back after this.